Someone's up there working on it. I'll just keep talking. Guys, it is really good to see you. This morning we're picking up in this series called Encounters with Jesus. We're looking at some of the most famous encounters in the Bible where Jesus met with someone to learn about how to share the gospel. More than that, not just how to share the gospel, but specifically how gospel sharing is not just information that leaves my mouth or your mouth and goes into someone's ears, but your whole life, the presence of who you are as a person. The more that you encounter Jesus in your own life in a real, intimate, personal way, the more God uses that to help others who know you encounter Jesus as well. It's not just the information, it's also the inspiration of the Holy Spirit working in your life. And for today's sermon, we are going to start looking at specific parts of the gospel. So let me give you just like a brief overview of what we've done so far. The first sermon was called Evangelism was Worship. We just understood that evangelism, before it's like serving my neighbor, it's worshiping my God. And then the second sermon, we saw that evangelism for all people. We don't try to pre-select who's ready for the gospel. We just share it whenever the opportunity arises. And this is also why we stay faithful in our lives, so our lives can communicate the beauty of the gospel. And the third sermon was, not everyone will listen. So it is for all, but not everyone listens. And we study what Jesus says and teaches about how that works. And then last Sunday was called The Message Matters. What is the gospel message? We were in that parable. And now for the next couple of sermons, we're going to look at two specific parts of the gospel, probably the two most significant parts, and kind of breaking it down to understand it more. For today's sermon, I have really prayed that we would so sense God's presence and friendship, that you would sense that as we are talking about something that makes us all feel insecure, which is the depth and reality of our sin. Something that should not surprise anyone in this room, if you've read any of the Bible or even maybe read a blog online, like what is Christianity about? Shouldn't surprise anyone that God is a God of law. That's pretty easy to intuit. That if God exists, He's a God of holiness and law. What is rather surprising, how is it possible that this God can really care about the law and yet still be a God of grace? How does that work? It's got to be one or the other, right? I mean, either you care about the law and you care about justice and you care about righteousness and you really deal with every sin and you're a God who says, we're going to make this right. Or you're a God who says, I deal in grace and I forgive and I wash over all sins, and I invite you into relationship. But we all know as Christians from experience, it's not like you become a Christian and your sin nature evaporates. You're declared righteous by your faith in Jesus, and yet functionally, day to day, you're not righteous at all. How can God be of the law and of grace? How does this work? I'm praying that you would so see that and sense that in the encounter that we see today. So the sermon title is Making Sense of Sin. 4 points we'll look at together. Isn't sin an outdated word? Reordering our loves. The intellectual masks the emotional. And Jesus must be the focus. That's what we're going to look at together. All right, friends, let's read our full passage. Jordan read some of it kindly for us. Thank you, Jordan, for leading and praying for us, brother. John 4, verses 4 through 26. This is the famous encounter with the woman at the well, for anyone who's read that before. John 4, 4 through 26, here's what we find in the Word. He, being Jesus, had to travel through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the property that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, worn out from his journey, sat down at the well. It was about noon. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Give me a drink, Jesus said to her, because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" She asked him. For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask him, and he would give you living water." "Sir," said the woman, "you don't even have a bucket, and the well is deep. So where do you get this, quote, living water? You aren't greater than our father Jacob, are you? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, and as did his sons and livestock." Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never get thirsty again. In fact, the water I will give him will become a well of water springing up in him for eternal life." "Sir," the woman said to him, "give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water." "Go call your husband," he told her, "and come back here." "I don't have a husband," she answered. "You have correctly said, 'I don't have a husband,'" Jesus said, "for you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." "Sir," the woman replied, "I see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus told her, "Believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Jesus told her, "I, the one speaking to you, am he." All right, this passage, radically easy to misunderstand, can be very confusing, but boy, is it maybe one of the most powerful explanations of sin in the Bible. And oh, how graceful and gentle our Savior is in dealing with the deepest, most insecure parts of a person. Which, if you think you don't have, I'm praying the Holy Spirit makes you think different before this sermon is complete. Let's start in point 1, because for some of us, when I say the word sin, this sermon's about sin, depending on the denominational genealogy you came from or how long you've been a Christian, maybe in the back of your mind you sometimes think, or maybe your neighbor thinks this, or your parents, or your friends, or coworkers, maybe they'll ask you, do Christians still talk about sin? Is that not an outdated concept? Is there a more medical or scientific or modern way that we could talk about what's wrong with people? Do we have to use the word sin? It's a very fair question. It's a really fair question. So this whole first point is going to be explaining what sin is and why it's actually a very helpful word. And so I would encourage you to track with me, because I think this will fix a lot of misunderstanding that certainly is in the world and oftentimes in the church. For many modern people, using the word sin to describe human behavior is like talking about medical care in the 17th century, or referring to a pair of pants as breeches. It feels out of date, out of touch, and something much more fit for a bygone generation. Emotionally speaking, for some of you, it may provoke images of angry preachers in small country churches raving about fire and brimstone. However, the sharing of the gospel is incomplete. It is incomplete if it doesn't include the concept of sin. Try as we might, There is not a better word to capture what we're talking about. And so the question is, well, what are we talking about then, Ryan? What is sin? Let's define it. Well, we will. Let's define it now. And I'll also explain why this is challenging for us. Sin is challenging to define because when the Bible uses this word, sometimes it's describing a spiritual condition. Sometimes it's describing a specific action. Sometimes it's describing a feeling. Sometimes it's describing a desire. The Bible uses the word sin to describe all those things. And it can get confusing. Like, well, then what is sin if sin is all these things? But an example is going to help us here. Here's the example. Surprise, surprise, I don't think anyone has any issues with recognizing, no matter if you've been a believer for a long time or you're here and you're not a believer at all, and a friend invited you just to hear what the gospel's about. Murder is a sin. I'll probably agree with that. That's an action. That is an actual action that's taken. However, it's also a sin to harbor vengeance in our hearts and desire to murder someone. The Bible would say that's a sin too when there's no action even involved, just the desire. God sees that desire before him. It is a sin. Well, let's go even further back from desire. It's even a sin to have the feeling of hating a person. Now, at this point, no action's been taken, and there's not even a desire to see a specific person die, but just the feeling of hating the person is also sin. Let's go even further back. Our human condition, which makes us capable of seeing any person as expendable. Right? You realize you can't hate a person except by seeing them as expendable, not in the image of God, not made after the Holy Trinity in His image. You have to make them expendable to even hate them. And the fact that we are capable of even doing that, even without the feeling, without the desire, without the action, just the capability, the Bible calls sin. Do you follow? Sin is a condition you're born into. That's why David in the Psalms talks about being born into sin. What he means is there's something broken in the human soul. And we all know it. The whole world knows it. And everyone's trying to explain it in different ways. Sin is the only word I know of or have ever known of that captures in the widest sense the capability, the feeling, the desire, and the action. So, this encounter between Jesus and the woman at the well, this encounter captures the full range of condition, feeling, desire, and action. And here's what's so helpful. This is why it's so viscerally helpful for us. Jesus describes sin as a thirst. Right? The whole conversation we just read about was about water and thirst. This image of thirst. I'm not talking a literal thirst. I'm talking a deep soul thirst. So let's think for a moment, as we're thinking through what is sin, I want to consider how Jesus led this woman. Let's just walk through and talk through what we saw in the Word. The first thing Jesus says is he says to her, "Give me a drink. I'd like a drink, please." And then she comments back to him, "Why are you talking to me?" Which was a really reasonable thing to say. Because this is ancient history, maybe you're going, why is this so let's just think of it this way. I want you to imagine being in 1875, some southern American state, and a white male business owner gets in line at the African American water fountain and says to a woman, "Can I drink from your fountain?" And she's going, "What? We don't relate to one another. I'm a Samaritan woman, you're a Jewish man." That was the level of animosity between Jews and Samaritans. So it's like Jesus going to this woman and saying, "Can I drink from your fountain? Can I get in your line?" She's like, "You should just wait for me to leave and get your own water. That's what you do. We're not supposed to consort together." So she's confused about why he's even talking to her. And then when she says that, Jesus says back to her, "If you really knew who I was, you would ask me for a drink, and I would give you living water." Now, at this point, we can tell this woman she's shrewd, and she may be a simple woman, but she understands. Jesus says, "I'll give you water." The next thing she says is, "Okay, you don't have a bucket. How are you going to give me water? You didn't show up. You have a canteen in your robe or something? You don't have anything to draw water." And then she says, "The well is deep. So how are you going to give me water?" And we're starting to see now that Jesus is talking about not literal water, and she's not realizing that yet. She's still thinking water, H2O, and Jesus thought something else. So Jesus goes on, and he says more about, "I can give you this water. This water will make you thirsty again. The water I give you, you will never be thirsty again." Now, we still know the woman is very confused, because I'll just read it to you in verse 15. Just listen. She said, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water." So she's going, "Okay, you've got like Jack and the Beanstalk magical water or something, I guess. You have water. If I drink, I never get thirsty again. Okay, well, then give me the water, and I won't have to come back to this well to keep getting water." So she's still in the literal world, and Jesus is in the spiritual world. This sermon is not about this at all, but I will say this verse right here is such a good teaching on dangers of a prosperity gospel that loses the heart of the gospel. Right? There are many people that come to Jesus for their family or their career or whatever else, and they say, "Jesus, if you can give me something that makes my life work so I don't have to do this anymore and it just fixes me." And if Christianity does that for a season, that's great. But what about when suffering comes? If the main reason I'm following Jesus is for literal thirsts, but the main reason I'm following him is not for my deep soul thirst, the enemy will get to that Achilles heel. I'm not saying that the Lord doesn't meet literal needs. He meets literal needs all over the Bible in the Old Testament. But in this moment, Jesus is not mostly concerned about this woman's comfort or convenience of drawing water or any literal need in her life. He is pointing to a deeper soul thirst, and he's saying, this is what I want to talk about first. A deeper thirst in you that water from this well is not going to fix. Now, here's where we get a little bit confused. Seemingly out of nowhere, this whole conversation's been about water. Out of nowhere, Jesus says, "Go get your husband and bring him back." And then she says, "I don't have a husband." And then Jesus confronts her, sure, very gently, but very honestly. It's interesting how he confronts her. The first thing he says is, you have made a very truthful statement. You don't have a husband, but you've had 5. And the man you're sleeping with now is not your husband. And then he, at the back end, says the same thing. You've spoken very truthfully. Wow. I mean, without understanding much about this passage, we're probably kind of going, wow, like this is a pretty heavy, confrontational Jesus. Like, showed up to look for water, and then he's just going to out my sexual history and even sort of make these backhanded comments like, thanks for being honest. You're right, you don't have a husband, you've had 5. Is that how he's saying it? Is he sort of like, yeah, right? Like, is he being sarcastic? I don't think so. I think he's being very intentional and gentle. I think he's probably saying this with a smile. Why do I think this? Well, the reason is there is nothing random about this. This is deliberate. And here's why. Jesus is trying to help her see, you don't even realize that you have a deep soul thirst. You don't even know yourself. And Jesus is saying, you've been trying to fill this thirst your whole life. Your whole life, you've been trying to convince yourself that you matter and you're enough and you're approved of and you have meaning and you have purpose. Your whole life, you've been trying to fill this thirst, and you've done it through the affection of men. You see, when Jesus says, go get your husband, you know what he's saying? Go get your current living water. What are you currently drinking to live? Where are you looking for security and meaning and purpose and joy and peace? Where are you looking for these? And he's helping her to look in herself and to say, I'm still talking about water. We're still talking water. Go get your husband and bring him. Go get your water. Wow. You know, to put ourselves in this space, maybe you could think to yourself, in your own conversion story, or even in your current battles with sin, what would Jesus say to us? Go get your career. Go get your kids. Go get your financial statements. Go get whatever it is that right now is functionally working in your life as your living water. Man, it could be almost anything. And here's where Christianity stands apart from every other religion that's so easy to miss. The most dangerous things that pull us from God are not wicked things. Those pull us from God, but it's easy to see the wicked things. The things that destroyed Israel, the things that destroyed the Pharisees, the things that destroy people the most are good things that become God things. Paul even says this in Romans 1. His definition of sin is exchanging the Creator for created things. That's what this woman has done. Jesus is helping her see your living water has been found in your sex appeal. Your living water has been found in your Avon collection, if that's even a thing women buy anymore, and your perfume. And your living water is found in that thrill that you feel when you walk into the ancient Starbucks and she's looking around and who is noticing me? That's your living water, Jesus says. It's your appeal. It's how you look. It's the affections of men. And it's obviously not satisfying you because you've now worked through 5 husbands. And you're with someone else who's not your husband. Man, Jesus is moving toward her deepest insecurities. But listen clear for this woman and listen clear for you. Just a God of law would say, I'm driving toward your insecurities because once we find them, I'm going to say, told you so, you always knew you were trash and you're nothing. That's not what Jesus is doing. Why is he driving her to face the ugliest part of herself? Because Jesus is saying, I am working to get you to admit this because the moment you do, I've got living water. I'm going to heal you. I'm going to heal you right now. But the good tooth or the good dental stuff can't come in until the bad one gets pulled. We're going to have to go into the dentist, spiritually speaking. And if that rotten thing does not get yanked, we're not going to kill the gingivitis. And Jesus is saying, we got to pull this, and it's going to hurt. But I'm not pulling it to hurt you. I'm pulling it to save you. That's what Jesus is doing. You know, our modern medical, educational, and psychiatric institutions have created all kinds of scientific theories to describe this deep soul thirst I'm talking about. They might say the following things about this woman. If this woman at the well was met by Jesus and she got online and found a good counselor, maybe even some good Christian counselor, go to a counselor, here's maybe some things she would hear. Listen, ma'am, the problem isn't your sin. You just have an anxious, preoccupied attachment pattern. That's a real thing. And it is helpful as far as describing behavior, but we're going to see in a moment, it's not helpful for finding healing. It doesn't go deep enough. That would describe this woman's life in a modern medical context. Anxious, preoccupied attachment pattern. Or maybe they'd say this, ma'am, your problem isn't sin. You're just locked in a cycle of toxic codependence, which also describes what she's been living in. Once again, it doesn't go deep enough, and we'll see why. Thirdly, she might go to a sex counselor. They say, ma'am, the problem isn't your sin. You have what's called intimacy anorexia sex addiction, which is also a real term. All 3 of these medical diagnoses describe this woman's behavior. However, by getting away from the word sin, it locks her into something that she will never be free from. Why? By the way, I'm not trying to communicate that counseling is worthless or that we can't learn from medical and scientific diagnoses. I'm not saying that at all. These are very helpful in their right place. Just like literal water is great for your body, but it doesn't go deep enough. We need more than just our bodies to be fine. We need our souls to be saved. And we need our minds and our hearts and our lives and our relationships to get help, and counseling can do that. But the work Jesus does, it's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. You see, friends, these are inferior because when you describe a thirst in worldly terms like that, the antidote is always filling yourself with some sort of worldly help. If my deepest problem is an anxious attachment pattern, I'll just learn a new attachment pattern. But what if your problem's deeper than that? And Jesus says it is. In other words, here's a different way of saying it. Jesus doesn't say to this woman, I know how to heal you. I'm going to teach you how to replace your thirst for the affection of bad men instead with a thirst for the affection of good men. That's not what Jesus does. You can't deal with this deep soul thirst with a worldly solution. He's not saying, you've wanted the bad boys, let's teach you to seek after a good man. Or let's talk about like Murphy Brown from 1980s, right? That old show of like a divorced woman who's like a strong career person, and the whole point of the show was, I'm done with seeking men, and I'm going to build a career. Jesus doesn't say, you know how you fix this dependence upon men? Quit trying to be attractive and just be smart and successful. We're going to replace your hunger for men for a hunger to have a successful career. That's not what Jesus does. He's not trying to replace her literal water with other literal water. Another example to maybe help. Imagine a young man goes to a counselor. The young man says, my dad never accepted me, so I have all these problems. The counselor says, I'm going to give you unconditional positive regard to help you love yourself and to accept yourself to overcome these problems. Now, this is going to treat his symptoms for a season, but what's happened? All that's happened is I've traded living for my dad's approval to now living for my counselor's approval. That's all I've done. My dad never accepted me. It was never enough. I get a counselor. My counselor says, I'm going to give you unconditional positive regard. We're going to celebrate your successes every week, and we're going to talk about these. And the guy feels better because now he's like, I never needed my dad. Now I have my counselor. But what have we done? We've stole from Peter to pay Paul. We've not fixed the thirst. The young man still operates in a world where he doesn't feel put together if there's not an older human male who says, you're enough. How does he get past that? How does he get past that? How does the word of the Father through the Son saying, you're saved, I love you, you're mine, how do those words speak louder than any human voice? Are you following? You can't fix worldly thirst with other worldly waters. Forgive me, you can't fix spiritual thirst with worldly waters. Jesus is telling this woman about a deep relationship with himself. Worshiping God and knowing God, this woman is at the end of her rope because she's been drinking and drinking and drinking from the affection of men, and she is still empty. She is still empty. Point 2, the rest of the points are pretty quick because you're going, that was really long, Ryan. Yes, it was. Number 2, reordering our loves. This is quick, but it's important. I'm not saying that desiring the affection of another person is bad. I'm not saying that. It's a good thing. What I am saying is we all have a deep soul thirst, and we try to fill it with relationships, career, pleasure, comfort, success, empty religion, 100 other things. And what happens is what's been called the disordering of your loves. Now, this language comes from a 4th century theologian. His name is Augustine, brilliant theologian, and here's what he taught. This makes so much sense once I say it. Genesis 1 says that God made all things. God created everything. Satan created nothing. He's a creation. Only God makes things, period. And in the beginning of the Bible, it says all things were good. Here's what this means. Sin, by its very nature, is a virus or a parasite that twists what is good to be used for ill. But Satan and sin cannot create anything. He creates nothing. He's a creature. He twists what's good. He is a virus on the hard drive. What that means is, what's wrong with us is not that Satan has somehow created or inserted bad things in us. He can't. What he's done is he's gone in your life and he has disordered your loves. And so now, instead of your life being driven by the Lord, my closest relationships, whatever else, now it's all scattered. It's like pleasure, comfort, career, Jesus, maybe something else, then Jesus. You see what I'm talking about? What's wrong with us is our loves are all disordered. This woman's loves were disordered. Top of her list was the affection of men. That's why she's running after this. Jesus is trying to move himself to the top of her list in a big chasm before the next thing shows up. And I'm not just talking, I'm talking good things. It's like the Lord, huge space, everything else. Her loves are disordered. That's what's wrong with us. Our loves are disordered. When you share the gospel with someone else, the hope you're giving them is a reordering of their loves. That's what actually gets rid of all the chaos and anger and anxiety and brokenness in our life. We were made to operate with a certain priority in God's image. When that gets disordered, all of our emotions get disordered. The way that peace comes into our life is the correct reordering of our loves. Point 3, the intellectual masks the emotional. This is also a quick point, but boy, is this important. Did you notice that once Jesus got really intimate with her and talked about her insecurities, she changed the subject immediately? I would too. She said, "You Jews worship here, but we worship here." Maybe someone here says, "How about them Cowboys, Jesus? Let's talk about something else." How's work been? Well, the weather's nice here in Sychar today. She changes the subject. Now, Jesus willingly follows her into the subject change. He starts to talk theology with her. We're not going to get into that. There's some good, rich stuff there, but that's not the point of this sermon. He talks some theology with her, but notice he keeps circling back to something he said earlier. When she first talked about not having a husband, the first thing he said was, "You've spoken truthfully. You don't have a husband, but you have had 5. And at the end of that statement, he said, "You spoke truthfully." Did you notice what he said at the end here? I'll read it to you, just listen. "But an hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth." Truth. Jesus is circling back to the most intimate parts of this woman's life. He does not let the conversation stay in some abstract theological argument. Now, here's my point. This is important. This will be useful for you. In my experience, over years of pastoring and loving on people, here's what I found in almost every case. Every objection to Christianity that is theological or cognitive is actually out in front of deeper objections that are personal, emotional, and relational. When someone says, "I'm having trouble believing because I just don't think the Bible has authority," or it's written in a certain way, or "I'm not sure it's true," that's a fine argument to talk about. In almost every case, this is what the outside reason is that I'm rejecting Jesus. The real reason is much deeper, and it makes me feel insecure, and I don't want to talk about that. Now listen, you might be going, "Is that true, Ryan?" It is true, and I can prove it to you right now through my, at times, idiocy that I have to repent of. I'm married. I have been for 20 years. Love my wife. She's serving the kids and seedlings right now. Praise Jesus for her and all those servants. Sometimes we hurt each other's feelings. Sometimes she hurts my feelings. We do that. You ever been married before? Feelings get hurt, man. They get stomped on. It's part of marriage. You're trying to figure it out and love another person. You know what my first intuition is when I get my feelings hurt? To not admit my feelings were hurt because I don't want to look small. So that if I'm in a bad mood, I want to try to figure out what's some plausible story I could tell my wife that shields from the fact that I just feel hurt. You know, there was a season when just spiritual warfare in my life, it's like my wife has always had some good, deep, close friendships. Praise God for that. Friendships are good. There was a season where I was jealous of her friendships in the weirdest way, where I was like, "When you're with me, do you like having fun with me as much as with your friends?" You know how hard it is to say that? Because of my own sin. You know what's easier to say? "Oh man, it was a long day," or "I'm tired," or "this is going on," and the reality is I need to sit down and cry and just say, "I want to be better friends with my wife." You know this is true about you. And it's also true about unbelievers, true about the human heart. We don't want to deal with the real emotional, personal things that bring insecurity, so we put up other things that seem more plausible, because by talking about these, I don't have to talk about these. And so all I'm saying is, sometimes we think, man, in order to share the gospel or to evangelize, I'm going to have to know so much theology. I'm going to have to know how to answer all the questions. Well, when did the Nicene Creed happen? What happened to the Council of Nicaea? What's the Chalcedonian Creed? You know what? What's all the order of the books of the Bible? Do I know the fruits of the Spirit in the order? Love, joy, peace. We're like memorizing all these things to be good evangelists or whatever. And here's the point that we're missing, right? Sharing Jesus with someone else is not that complicated. Here's what it means. It requires you to talk about real things with real people who have a real soul thirst just like you. That's it. Talk about real things with real people who have a real soul thirst just like you. That is home central, where faith, the battle of faith, must be fought. It is not one, the idea that we're going to get in intellectual arguments and I'm going to argue all of someone's objections away intellectually, and they're just going to say, wow, I never knew that about the Bible. Show me a church. I'm ready to confess all my sins. It doesn't work like that. We generate the intellectual issues to hide the emotional ones. That's what we do. It's what the heart does. Jesus knows this. That's why Jesus doesn't get into a long argument about Jewish theology versus Samaritan theology. He circles it back to, if you want to worship God, you have to do it in truth. And she knows from what he said earlier that Jesus realizes, you're not really dealing in truth yet, are you? You're not really being honest yet, are you? You're not really looking yourself in the mirror yet, are you? You see, the intellectual masks the emotional. Don't get worked up about having to know all the answers before you share the love of Jesus. Just be a real person who talks about real things with other real people who have the same thirst that you do. It just shows up in different ways. Finally, point 4, to finish this. Please do not miss this final point. Man, it's so important. Where does Jesus direct the attention of the woman? Does he drive her eyes to a set of truths? Does he give her a new theology? Does he teach her a fresh psychological paradigm? Does he show her a church service or a political campaign or a social action theory? None of that. You know what he points her eyes to? Directly at himself. He does not say, I'm here to show you a new way to live. I'm here to show you a new way to direct your life. I'm here to give you a purpose-driven life or whatever. None of that. Those are all fine, but Jesus doesn't care about her looking at those things right now. They're not important. They're not important. No life comes from any of that. Zero life. They're valuable. You get zero life from it. Life comes from eyes fixed on Christ alone. She says, Messiah's coming, and he says, he's here, it's me. Know me. The men have been the living water. I don't have living water, ma'am. I am the living water. Know me, and I will know you. Be truthful with me, and I will speak the truth to you. Walk with me, and I will walk with you. Seek me with all your heart, and you will find me. I am your living water, Jesus says. How do we know this woman was saved? There's a way we know she was saved. It's important to see John 4, 28 through 30. It'll be on the screen. I want you to see what she does after this encounter with Jesus. Then the woman left her water jar, went into town, and told the people, come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They left the town and made their way to him. Friends, something you've got to see here. How do you know conversion's real in your life? If it's just empty religion, then when you encounter God and you meet other people, you just give them more things to do. I met God and I learned the way that you're supposed to be living. I became a Christian mom and I learned what's wrong with you today. I learned what's wrong with the culture and what's wrong with my family. And because I've experienced the law of God, I've now seen, and she doesn't go into town and say, I met Jesus, okay? And he showed me the law, and now I'm going to tell all you how to live. She goes and she says, I just met a man who solved me in a way I have never been solved. I finally get why I tick. I met a man who showed me me. And he loved me. He loved me. He met me and he talked to me. And I know I'm an outcast among all you because I've been on the husband train, and that's why I draw water alone in the well and there's no other women around me. Also, she draws it at noon, the hottest point of the day. You don't draw water at noon, you draw in the morning. She doesn't go in the morning because the other gals are there. She don't want to be around them. She's an outcast. But she just goes back and she says, I met a man who helped me finally meet me. And I saw my sin. And he showed me where to find real water. Notice the whole town does not go seek Jesus because she brings a moral paradigm or a list of things to do or an explanation of what's wrong with the world. They want to go meet him because she says, he met me in the deepest insecurities of my life and he healed me. That's why they go. Friends, Buddha of Buddhism, Muhammad of Islam, Joseph Smith of Mormonism, and every other religion, when you study them, all of them say, I will show you the way. This is not an opinion. This is a historical fact. Jesus Christ is the only man who has ever repeatedly said, attested by historians inside the Bible and outside the Bible, that he straight up said, I in the flesh am God. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. That makes Jesus either who he said he was, or an amazing con man, or a complete lunatic. That's your options. That's really your options. There is too much historical evidence for Jesus to have any other conclusion. He did not mean to leave a different conclusion. You either give your life to him as Lord and Savior, who's the only living water that can heal you, or you view him as the most successful con man in world history, or a total nutcase. That's your options. That really is our options. And man, when you look at his life in the Bible, and you see how this man lived, and the things he said. So friends, making sense of sin. It's a deep soul thirst. You have it, I have it. Jesus is our living water. When we share the gospel, we're helping to reorder loves, and we're showing people, let me show you where to get water that never runs out. Relationship with God. Pray with me.